He looked at the way her fingers gripped the cheap plastic pen, then at the modest cut of her blue and green uniform, and smirked. To Victor Langford, the waitress standing before him wasn't a human being with a story. She was a prop in his nightly play of power. He believed that by ordering in a razor-sharp, high-level Shanghainese business dialect, he could reduce her to a stuttering punchline for the woman in red sitting beside him. He thought his wealth made him invulnerable. He was wrong. He didn't know that the woman recording his order was more than just staff. And the response she was about to give would not only freeze the air in the room, but dismantle his entire legacy. This is the story of how a predator became the prey. The air inside the Gilded Gate, the most restricted dining room in the city, hung heavy with the scent of vintage cigars, Wagyu beef, and the metallic tang of old money. For Amina Brooks, however, it smelled of antiseptic and hospital corridors. Amina adjusted the high collar of her uniform, a garment that felt like a straitjacket because it represented a life she never chose. It was 9:12 p.m. The room was a cacophony of crystal clinking and laughter that cost more than Amina's yearly rent. "Move, Brooks, move," the floor manager hissed. Amina kept her voice a level, professional hum. She ignored the throbbing in her feet. She had been on them for 12 hours. To the men in tuxedos, she was invisible architecture, the hand that cleared the glass, the shadow that refilled the water. They didn't know that 3 years ago, Amina had been a rising star in international law, a candidate for a prestigious global fellowship until her sister's heart failing changed the trajectory of her life. Every tip was a drop in the ocean of a six-figure medical debt. She approached table 12 with the practiced, forgettable smile she used as armor. The man there, Victor Langford, sat with the relaxed entitlement of someone who owned the world. Beside him, the woman in the red dress was already laughing, her hand over her mouth, as if Amina were a private joke. Victor looked up, his eyes gleaming with a predatory amusement. He didn't see a genius, he saw a dumb fellow he could break for sport. Arrogance is a temporary mask, character is permanent. Julian Blackwood tried to use a dead language to humiliate a waitress, only to find out she was the master of his own game. Lesson: never mistake someone's current circumstances for their worth. Hit that like button and subscribe to read more stories of unexpected justice. The heart monitor beeped. That same steady beep, over and over. 4 months now, that's all Amina Brooks heard when she sat in room 402. She'd arrive at 4 in the morning, before the sky even started turning gray over Queens, and she'd watch those jagged lines jump across the screen. Her own chest would tighten every time the pattern changed. Chloe used to fill their apartment with drawings, sidewalk cafes in Paris, pigeons on fire escapes, things like that. Now she just lay there under a thin blanket, her skin almost the same color as the sheets. Her heart was giving out. Something in the genes, the doctors said. They could fix it. $450,000, they could fix it. To them, it was just a number. To Amina, it was everything. The subway ride from St. Jude's to the restaurant, that's when Amina became someone else. She sat up straight, pulled out her beat-up copy of Mandarin commercial law, the margins filled with her own notes. While everyone else slept or stared at their phones, she worked through treaty interpretations in her head, traced the legal tangles of South China Sea trade routes. She used to be good at this stuff. Really good. There'd been talk of fellowships, international positions. But being smart doesn't pay hospital bills. Doesn't cover the medications that cost more per dose than most people make in a week. By the time she got to the service entrance of the Gilded Gate, the books went away. She changed into the uniform, blue and green, and pulled her hair back so tight it made her temples ache. At the restaurant, they didn't want to know she had a brain. They wanted someone who'd refill the water glasses without being asked, who'd disappear the second they were done being useful. Amina gave them exactly that. Every tray she carried, every "right away, sir," was another few dollars toward Chloe's surgery. The money came in so slowly she sometimes wanted to scream. She had one spot that was hers. Behind the bar, between the extra tablecloths and the silver polish, there was just enough room to hide her books. When things got quiet, that 15-minute gap between dinner and dessert, she'd duck back there. She'd run through arbitration documents in her head while she made the baccarat glasses shine. Marcus, the floor manager, thought she was simple. Obedient. He had no idea what was going on in her head, no clue she was preparing for a life beyond this place. If she ever got there. The tray wasn't heavy. What was heavy was keeping her mouth shut. Men like Victor Langford talked over her, made little comments about how she probably never finished high school, treated her like a co-track that happened to move. She'd learned to take it. Just let it roll off. But standing there in the dim light before service started, waiting for Marcus to tell her which tables were hers tonight, Amina felt something flicker inside her. The old feeling. The one that reminded her she knew things these people would never understand. That language wasn't just words, it was power. And she still had that. The Gilded Gate wasn't about the food. It was about making people feel like gods. Every detail in that dining room existed to remind the customers they were special and everyone else wasn't. Gold covered the walls, catching the light from fixtures set into the ceiling, throwing shadows across carpets so plush your footsteps made no sound. They filtered the air in there. You couldn't smell the city, no exhaust, no garbage, nothing real. Definitely nothing like disinfectant or the stale air of a hospital room. Victor Langford walked in like he owned the place. Maybe he did, for all Amina knew. The whole room seemed to tilt his direction when he came through those heavy doors. His tuxedo fit like it was grown on him, not sewn, and he moved easy, the way people do when they've never had to check a price tag. He had his usual group trailing behind, a couple of finance guys who laughed at everything he said, and a woman in a red dress so bright it almost hurt to look at. The color screamed for attention in a room where everything else was muted and tasteful. Amina stood back by the wine cabinet, watching. Victor didn't look at the staff. He talked past them, like the maitre d' was Siri or Alexa. He sent back a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon, the good stuff from '96, not because anything was wrong with it, but because he didn't like the ice bucket. Just wanted everyone to know he could. One of the younger servers, a kid who couldn't be more than 20, went red in the face and practically ran to get a different one. "You see that, Julian?" Victor said to one of his friends, not bothering to lower his voice. "No initiative whatsoever. They're like furniture. Nice furniture, sure, but there's nothing going on upstairs." The woman in red laughed. It was a pretty sound, but empty. She leaned back, her diamonds catching the candlelight, looking around the room like she was bored already. "It's nice though, isn't it? That there's still places where people know their place. They're made for this kind of work, Victor. To fade into the background while we enjoy ourselves." Amina heard it. She didn't react. She'd heard worse. But her mind went to work anyway, cataloging it all like evidence. The way Victor's thumb traced the rim of his glass, like everything in his sightline belonged to him. He wasn't here for dinner. He was here to be served, to have people bow and scrape and prove the world worked the way he thought it should. Marcus caught her eye and gave her the nod. Her table. Time to go. She straightened her apron, touched the pen in her pocket to make sure it was where it should be, and headed for table 12. Walking into the light. Into the cage. Except she knew something they didn't. The bars were made of words, and she spoke more languages than any of them. Amina stopped at table 12, her shadow falling across the white tablecloth. Victor looked up slowly, his eyes moving from her shoes, polished but not expensive, up to the plastic name tag on her uniform. "Amina," he said, like he was testing how it sounded. He settled back in his chair. The woman in red turned to watch. "Tell me, Amina, do you find the wine list here a little complicated? I'd hate to confuse you with what we're looking for." The woman didn't even try to hide her smile. "Victor, be nice. I'm sure she's perfectly good at remembering what the soup of the day is." She looked at Amina with fake sympathy. "Though I doubt they cover the finer points of corporate acquisition in waitress training, do they?" Victor laughed, quiet and dry. He glanced at the men with him, something predatory flickering in his eyes. "Actually," he said, his voice going lower, more intimate, I'm tired of English tonight. It's too blunt for what we've been discussing. And this is supposed to be an international restaurant, so I'm sure the staff can handle it. Then he switched. Just like that. No warning. He started speaking in Shanghainese, not the basic Mandarin you'd learn in a class, but the technical dialect businesspeople use, full of tonal shifts and industry jargon. He wasn't just ordering dinner. He rattled off instructions for the dongpa pork, wanted it made with some specific aged Shaoxing wine reduction, demanded the sea base be seared skin-side only for exactly 80 seconds. But he kept going. Started talking about some tech merger, throwing around obscure legal terms, fiduciary negligence, arbitration clauses, half showing off for his friends, half trying to humiliate whoever was unlucky enough to be standing there. The table went quiet. The finance guys leaned in, eating it up. The woman in red put her hand over her mouth, waiting for Amina to panic, to stutter, to run and get the manager. Victor finished with a sharp rising tone, the kind that says, "Your move." He crossed his arms and stared right at her, smiling. Waiting for her to fall apart. Waiting for proof that she was exactly what he thought she was. Scenery, background noise, nothing. Amina didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stood there with her pen ready, looking at him with a blank, steady expression. The silence hung there, thick and uncomfortable. Somewhere across the room, a glass clinked. Victor's smile got wider. He thought he'd won. Thought he'd finally broken through and exposed her. He had no idea what he'd just done. No idea that the door he'd opened was one Amina had been standing in front of for years, just waiting for someone to turn the handle. The silence at table 12 wasn't normal anymore. It was heavy, thick, the kind you could feel pressing on your chest. Victor sat back, thumb hooked in his vest, waiting for Amina to stumble over her words and give him the ending he wanted. The woman in red had her phone angled just right, ready to record the moment. Then Amina took a breath. Not the kind you take when you're giving up. The kind you take before you do something you've been ready for your whole life. When she opened her mouth, what came out stopped everyone cold. Perfect Shanghainese, the business dialect, smooth and natural in a way Victor's wasn't. Her Mandarin didn't sound forced or clumsy. It sounded expensive. Old money. The kind of accent you only get from years of serious study. The woman in red's smile disappeared. Her hand dropped. Her mouth actually fell open. "I have your order for the dongpa pork," Amina said, her voice clear and sharp. "The chef will use the 20-year Shaoxing wine like you asked, though I'd recommend reducing it 5 seconds longer to account for the sugar levels in this year's batch. The sea base, skin-side sear is our standard, but I'll make sure the timing is exact." Victor's arms came uncrossed. His whole body went rigid. But she wasn't done. However, she went on, switching into the formal legal register that made the hedge fund guys go white, "About that loophole you mentioned for the tech merger. You said you'd use Section 4B to get around the fiduciary oversight. I'm afraid your reading of the 2019 Shanghai Trade Accord is out of date. The new amendment changed that clause. If you use the strategy you just outlined, you won't close the deal. You'll trigger a mandatory state audit. Your assets will be frozen in 48 hours. She stopped. Her pen, cheap plastic, rested on her notepad. The whole restaurant had gone quiet. People at other tables had stopped talking, stopped eating. The sound had just died. Victor looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. His face went from smug and red to pale gray. "Would you like me to repeat that in English for your friends, Mr. Langford?" Amina asked, her voice dropping to something quiet and almost polite. "Or would you rather keep your mistakes as private as the language you just used to insult me?" Victor tried to say something. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He stared at her, really looked at her for the first time, and she could see it register. She wasn't furniture. She wasn't background. She'd just torn apart his ego and his business plan in one go. The woman in red stared down at her plate. That bright dress suddenly looked ridiculous. Amina stood there, straight-backed, solid. Not invisible anymore. Nobody spoke. The air felt thick, dead, like it had been sucked out of the room. The woman in red sat there gripping her wine glass, the light gone from her eyes. That dress that had looked so bold and confident a minute ago now just looked loud, wrong. She glanced at Victor, then back at Amina, her mouth half open but nothing coming out. The fun was over. They'd been throwing insults at someone they thought was beneath them, and it turned out they were the ones who didn't measure up. Victor's friends, the two finance guys who'd been nodding along to everything he said, were looking at him differently now. The buddy-buddy act had evaporated. In their world, a bad deal was like blood in the water. They started exchanging looks, quick and cold, cutting Victor out of the loop entirely. If what Amina just said was true, and the way she'd said it, calm and precise, suggested it was, then Victor hadn't just been showing off. He'd announced a massive screw-up in front of witnesses. The language he'd used to prove how smart he was had just broadcast his failure to everyone at the table. "Victor," one of them said finally, his voice flat. "What she said about the 2019 amendment, is that right?" Victor couldn't answer. His throat felt like sandpaper. He stared at Amina, his face shifting between furious and stunned. He wanted to yell, to get her fired, to take back control of the room with money and volume. But he was stuck. Frozen by the fact that she knew more than he did. He'd spent years buying his way into being the smartest guy in the room because he could afford it. And now, here, using the very language he'd picked to humiliate her, she'd torn him apart. The woman he'd called furniture 10 minutes ago. Amina stood there, calm. She didn't smile. Didn't rub it in. Just held her pen and notepad like this was any other order. That somehow made it worse. Around the room, other people were starting to notice. The usual hum of the gilded gate had changed. For the first time anyone could remember, diners were looking at a server with something close to fear. Near the wine station, Marcus stood frozen, mouth hanging open. He'd been expecting trouble. He hadn't been expecting this. "I'll check on your order," Amina said quietly, slipping back into her waitress voice. Polite. Neutral. It was the final twist of the knife, a reminder that no matter what she'd just done, she was still the one in charge of whether they got dinner tonight. She turned and walked away, smooth and controlled, leaving the table in a silence so complete it felt like something had ended. Victor watched her go. His hands started to shake. Already his mind was working, trying to figure out how to destroy the woman who'd just made him feel this small. Victor sat there in the ruins of what his night was supposed to be. The silence pressed down on him, and he could feel his friends watching, their respect draining away. For someone like Victor, humiliation wasn't just embarrassing, it was unforgivable. And Amina was the one who'd done it to him. He watched her walk back toward the kitchen, shoulders square, head up, and something hot and vicious crawled up from his gut into his throat. Firing her wouldn't be enough. He'd make sure that mind she'd used against him landed her in a cell for the next 10 years. His hand moved under the table, smooth and practiced. He unclasped his watch, a Patek Philippe, platinum, worth more than most people made in a year, more than Amina's family probably had to their name. When she came back to clear a plate, moving with that same careful efficiency, he pretended to adjust his napkin. The second she leaned over to reach for a glass, he slipped the watch into the deep pocket of her apron. It landed soft, barely a sound. Only he knew it was there. Amina straightened up and turned to go. She'd barely made it 3 steps when Victor's voice cut through the room like a whip. "My watch!" He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "It's gone. My Patek. It was right here." The whole restaurant went dead quiet. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Marcus appeared out of nowhere, his face white. "Mr. Langford, I'm sure we can." "Someone stole it, Marcus." Victor jabbed a finger at Amina, his face twisted up with fake outrage. "She was the only one near the table. She's been acting odd all night, talking back, distracted. Search her. Right now." The woman in red was watching with wide eyes, a little smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She knew what Victor was doing. She wasn't going to say a word. Amina felt the floor drop out from under her. She felt the weight in her pocket, cold, heavy, wrong. It hadn't been there before. Her heart started pounding, hard and fast, nothing like the calm, logical rhythm she was used to. She looked at Victor and saw it in his eyes. Victory. Revenge. This was his answer to what she'd done. His secret language. Sir, I didn't touch your watch, she said. Her voice came out steady even though ice was spreading through her chest. Call the police, Victor said, stepping closer, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey and hatred. Or just search her apron, Marcus. Let's see how much that brilliant mind of hers is worth when she's caught stealing. I want her arrested. Now. Marcus looked at her, then at Victor. The calculation was obvious. He reached out, hand shaking, toward her pocket. Amina stood completely still. In her head, all she could see was Chloe in that hospital bed, the monitors beeping, the bills piling up. Victor hadn't just set a trap to embarrass her. He'd set one that would kill her sister by taking away the only income they had. The quiet broke with the sound of a spoon tapping against a bowl. Once, twice. It rang out like a judge's gavel in the dead silence of the gilded gate. From a corner table that had sat in shadow all night, a man stood up. He wasn't dressed like the others, no tuxedo, no flashy accessories. Just a charcoal turtleneck and a coat so well made it was almost invisible, the kind of quality that made Victor's expensive suit look like something off a rack. This was Elias Thorne. You didn't see his face on magazine covers because he owned the companies that printed the magazines. He also owned a controlling share of the Gilded Gate, though most people didn't know it. He liked watching his investments from the back of the room. He walked toward table 12 like he had all the time in the world, like the floor itself belonged to him. Marcus, the floor manager, stopped cold, his hand hovering near Amina's pocket. The color drained out of his face when he recognized who was coming. Victor was still caught up in his own performance, didn't even notice the shift until Thorne was standing right next to him, close enough to block out the light. That's quite a watch, Victor, Thorne said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, cold and precise. Patek Philippe 5131J, unless I'm wrong. Beautiful piece. Shame to see it used for a cheap con. Victor's arm dropped, his finger still pointing at Amina but shaking now. Elias? You don't, she stole it. I was just protecting your restaurant. I've been sitting over there for 3 hours, Victor, Thorne said, cutting him off. His pale eyes locked onto Victor's face, clinical, emotionless. I've watched this whole thing play out. Watched you try to use a language you barely speak to embarrass someone who clearly knows it better than you ever will. Watched you try to break her down for fun. And 5 minutes ago, I watched you slip that watch into her pocket while she was clearing your glass. The woman in red gasped, her fingers twitching against her dress. She glanced toward the exit. The two finance guys pushed their chairs back, putting distance between themselves and Victor like he was contagious. You didn't see, Victor started, his voice cracking, going high and desperate. I didn't just see it. I recorded it. Thorne held up a thin black device, the screen showing footage of the dining room. Security feed doesn't just go to Marcus's office. Goes to my server. I've been looking for Ms. Brooks for 1.5 years. I read her thesis on international arbitration twice before it disappeared from the journals. Didn't know she was here, putting up with people like you just to keep her sister alive. Thorne turned to Amina. His expression changed, softened into something like respect. He reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the watch, held it up so everyone could see it. Then he dropped it on the table like it was trash. Amina felt the air come back into her lungs, the cold fear of the last few minutes lifting. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was standing in a spotlight she hadn't asked for, but she wasn't going to hide from it. Victor looked at Thorne, then at Amina. Too late, he understood. He hadn't just lost a watch. He'd just been kicked out of the world he thought he ruled. Victor's world fell apart without a sound, but you could feel the impact. The two hedge fund guys didn't wait for explanations. In their world, being associated with someone like this was career suicide. Victor had just become toxic. They stood up fast, grabbing phones and folders like the table was on fire. "Victor," one of them said, his voice flat and done. "The merger's off. Indefinitely. We can't have our money anywhere near this kind of mess." They walked out and didn't look back. Empty chairs. The woman in red saw which way the wind was blowing. She stood, smoothed out her dress, and left without even glancing at the man she'd been laughing with 10 minutes earlier. She knew how to survive. Victor was going down, and she wasn't going with him. Elias Thorne didn't watch them leave. He kept his eyes on Victor. "Mr. Graves," he said to Marcus, who was still pale and shaking, "escort Mr. Langford out. He's banned from the Gilded Gate and every property we're affiliated with. If he comes back, call the police." Victor tried to say something, tried to pull rank with his family name, but the look on Thorne's face shut him up. It was the look of someone who could buy Victor's entire bloodline before lunch and still have money left over. Victor let himself be led away by the same manager he'd been pushing around all night, walking past tables full of people staring at him in silence, the same people he'd been trying so hard to impress. The heavy doors swung shut behind him. The tension in the room broke like a snapped wire. Thorne turned to Amina. The coldness was gone. What replaced it was something serious, professional, almost kind. "Ms. Brooks," he said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a business card. Thick, cream-colored paper. Expensive. "Sorry for the drama. But some things need to be said out loud." He set the card on the table next to the watch Victor had tried to frame her with. "I didn't come here for dinner. I came because my legal team's been trying to find you for a year. Your paper on cross-border trade ethics was exceptional. I need someone like you running my international compliance division. I don't need a waitress, Amina. I need a general counsel." Amina stared at the card. It wasn't just paper. It was a way out. The end of the tunnel she'd been crawling through for 2 years. "The salary," Thorne said quietly, "is enough to clear your debts immediately. Enough to get your sister the best care available. There's a car outside if you're ready to turn in that apron." Amina looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She touched the plastic name tag on her chest, the thing that had made her invisible, and slowly unpinned it. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like part of the scenery. She felt like someone building her own life. 6 months later, the oak doors of the Gilded Gate didn't feel as heavy. Maybe they'd fixed the hinges. Or maybe it was just that Amina wasn't carrying the weight of the world anymore when she pushed them open. The air inside still smelled like expensive wine and money, but Amina didn't smell like sweat and fear anymore. She smelled like Chanel and fresh air and freedom. She stopped in the entrance, checked her phone one last time. A photo had just come in, Chloe on a bench in Central Park, her face full of color again, holding a sketchpad. The text said, "Don't let them bore you, big sister. Making pasta tonight." Amina smiled. A real smile, not the careful one she used to wear. The surgery had worked. The debt was gone. The chains were off. When she walked into the dining room, things shifted. She wasn't wearing that teal and black uniform that made her disappear into the background. She had on a midnight blue dress that fit like it was made for her, that caught the light instead of hiding from it. She walked like the general counsel of Thorne Technologies. Like someone who handled international contracts before breakfast. Marcus was at the host stand, looking down at the reservation book. When he glanced up and saw her, his face went blank for a second. Pure shock. He didn't see a waitress he could boss around anymore. He saw someone who could probably buy the whole restaurant. His throat moved as he swallowed and came out from behind the podium, hands clasped tight in front of him. "Ms. Brooks," Marcus said, his voice lower now, careful. "It's an honor to have you back. Mr. Thorne is waiting at the owner's table." "Thank you, Marcus," Amina said. Her voice was steady, natural. She'd always had that authority in her. She'd just been forced to bury it. She didn't rub it in his face. Didn't need to. Just being here like this was enough. She walked through the room and people looked up. Not because she'd dropped something or gotten yelled at, but because she looked like someone worth noticing. She passed table 12, the place where Victor had tried to destroy her, and didn't even look at it. It was just furniture now. Elias Thorne stood up when she reached the private table in the back. He smiled, gestured to the chair across from him. As Amina sat down, a young server came over, his hands shaking a little as he held out the wine list. He had that same look she used to have. Scared of screwing up. Amina looked up at him and smiled. Warm. Kind. Take your time, she said quietly, closing the menu without reading it. I know how heavy that tray can be. The kid's shoulders dropped. He let out a breath and nodded, grateful. Amina turned back to Elias, picking up her water glass. She looked around the room, the gold on the walls, the crystal, the people all playing their parts. She wasn't part of the set anymore. She was writing her own story now. And for the first time in her life, the noise had finally died down enough for people to hear her.